And this is Ken Kraetzer for Sons of the American Legion Radio. It's graduation day for the class of 2020 at the United States Military Academy. It was delayed until mid-June. Normally it is Memorial Day weekend Saturday for the President of the United States, Donald Trump, who will be providing a graduation address to the nearly 1,100 class members. And we're very pleased to have joining us a graduate of the United States Military Academy from the famous class of 1987, and that is Colonel Sam Houston calling in today and from Florida, I understand. And Colonel Houston, how are you today?
I'm great, Ken. Greetings from the Emerald Coast of Florida.
Well, I appreciate you taking a few minutes to chat with us as a regular contributor to our programs on Sons of the American Legion Radio, and a dedicated veteran and a proud graduate. Tell us a little bit, if you would, what are the cadets thinking about now that they march up from the barracks to the parade? Now, it's not at Michie Stadium today. It's going to be out on the parade grounds on the plain at West Point. I saw the stage. Looks like it's going to be set up kind of close to the Jefferson Library on the south side of the plain. But they were, there was very little information given out about how things were going to work. As you can imagine, security's tight for this. Tell us, what was it like? What are the cadets thinking about in the half hour before they march up onto the plane for graduation?
Well, first off, I'd just like to mention of how happy all the cadets must be that, given the circumstances of the past few months, that they are in fact able to have a graduation ceremony. And what is going through their minds right now, I can only imagine from my own experience, which was over 30 years ago now. They've got to be totally exhilarated about the fact that they've made it through. They've grown closer to each other as brothers and sisters at the academy, closer than perhaps some of their own family members. And this is a moment that they're going to remember for the rest of their lives, a pinnacle of their life. When I look back on experiences that I've had, I will still always rank the graduation day from West Point to be one of the greatest days of my life.
Well, it certainly is. We've had the pleasure and the honor of attending the last 7 or 8 graduation days. It is spectacular. It's going to be different this year because of COVID-19. Unfortunately, the parents and family cannot attend. It's not going to be 20,000 spectators at Michie Stadium like it would normally be, but it's going to be a big day on the plane, and it's going to be a big audience on television watching. Tell us a little bit about what was your graduation day like? Who was your commencement speaker?
Well, a commencement speaker was someone who had spoken to our class many times. As a matter of fact, it almost became kind of a joke about the fact that he was speaking once again to our class. It was General John Wickham, who was the Army Chief of Staff at the time. And he even made a joke in his commencement speech about, basically, hello, 87 for again. Feel like we'd known each other really well. But the day of our graduation, we woke up to a rainy morning, and the biggest fear that we had was that our graduation ceremony was going to get moved inside of Eisenhower Hall. And when you have all your family members present to attend the event, your concern is that if it gets moved into Eisenhower Hall, first, it doesn't have the ambiance of being inside of Michie Stadium or on the plane for today's graduating class. I don't want to take anything away from where they're graduating, because that's a very unique event. And one thing, I'll get back to my graduation, but one thing I do want to say is that although this class won't have their family present, this West Point class will probably hold the distinction of having the most people nationwide watching their graduation of any class, because it's going to be so widely televised. But for the class of 87, we went through some very gut-wrenching and torturous minutes waiting for a decision to be made of whether or not the ceremony was going to be held indoors or outdoors. And I remember there was like a silent poll that went around among the cadets, and we all voted. We got our voice heard that we wanted to have it outside, and we didn't care if we smelled like wet mules in the rain. We wanted to have it outside. And as it turned out, the weather broke a little bit. It still stayed cloudy, and it was still a little dreary, but we had our ceremony in Mikey, and I'll tell you what, weather didn't make one hill beans a difference to how exciting it was to march across Lusk Reservoir and into Mikey Stadium, taking your seats, going through the ceremony, and then the ultimate moment of when the first captain turned around and said, "Class of '87 dismissed," and we got to toss our covers into the air and embrace and celebrate something that just 4 short years ago seemed like it would never arrive.
It's such a long experience at West Point, 47 months from our day in late June, early July, before July 4th and the summer. What are some of the key moments in a West Point career, key milestones that really stand out over the over 4 years of the training and the experience at West Point?
Well, the experience starts before you even arrive. Receiving your appointment, letting you know that the Board of Admissions has approved your application, and that you have been accepted into the academy, and you're being offered an appointment. That is when it starts. It was a very memorable experience for me, and I know that it had to have been for so many of my classmates. But then our day is always going to be a day that you'll remember. Stepping up to the man in the red sash, reporting to the first sergeant for the first time as ordered, learning how to eat in the mess hall, learning your 4 cadet responses, and just a blur of the hazing, rushing, sweating, smelling, stress. For so many of us, it was the first time in our lives we had really experienced that level of stress all at one moment, coming from every direction. The march back from Lake Frederick and breaking the end of Beast Barracks is a memorable moment when you are suddenly outnumbered by the upperclassmen by 3 to 1, and you go to your academic year company. The recognition ceremony at the end of plebe year was certainly a very memorable experience, to where we knew that at this point forward, we were no longer plebes, that we were actually part of the upper class, and that we had now officially been recognized. And then, of course, you have the standard ceremony, or the standard weekends that you will experience as a cadet. There's plebe parent weekend, yearling winter weekend, a 500th night, and 100th night. But probably the most exciting weekend of all of them is ring weekend, when you begin your first year and you have the ring ceremony, and you finally have that crass mass of brass and glass, and you put it on your finger, and if I can just make it through one more academic year and graduate, this ring will remain on my finger as part of the long gray line.
Well,
go ahead.
I always think about, what, in fact, my uncle who went to West Point in the late 1930s talked about Recognition Day as being such a milestone. And I can only imagine, I say to the cadets after, well, I think you got half of West Point done if you can get through plebe year. And so they do that. Isn't that the night before graduation?
Yes. Recognition ceremony happens after the conclusion of the graduation parade. So as you march back to the barracks, you march into the sally ports, you go back to your company area, and they line the plebes up, and all the upperclassmen, starting with the firsties, then the cows and the yearlings, they go through the line and they shake your hand and say their first name. But they also leave something for you to remember them by, like taking their bayonets or their sabers and scratching your breastplate or denting it. And, you know, so somewhere in my possessions, I still have that recognition ceremony breastplate with all the initials scratched in it and the dents and dings and everything else. And oh, and they scuff up your shoes. So if you had your nice, beautiful leather low quarters that you had shined all night the day before, they needed to just be thrown away the next day after graduation parade because they got scuffed up so bad. But it didn't matter. It was such a great feeling to know moving forward as you headed off to Camp Buckner that, you know, you were now part of the upper class. You were not going to be going through our day and Beast Barracks again. You were going to go to an advanced level of training, and it was going to be, although there was still haze involved with it, it was not the plebe level haze that you had experienced for a year.
Yeah, it seems like sophomore year for West Point cadets is a real challenge as you're given responsibility to manage a small group of freshmen, plebes, as you call them, and also a very tough academic year for the sophomores. So, and then we see the football players, you know, taking on more of a playing role at that time. That sounds like sophomore year is a big challenge.
It is, and actually I would submit to you that it's probably more of a challenge for classes today than it was when 87 went through. And that is, when 87 went through, the squad leaders in the cadet companies were the cows, and the firsties held all of the primary leadership positions within the cadet company. So the yearlings didn't have squad leader duties. We could be designated and rotated through as assistant squad leaders. But academically, yearling year was most certainly your real first taste of how difficult some of the academic challenges were going to be at the academy, because when you're a yearling, you actually start moving into whatever your majors courses are going to be to line you up for that. And that can mean a lot of engineering type courses, advanced math and stuff like that, that really requires a lot of midnight oil and elbow grease to get through, especially when you're a kid from the mountains of North Carolina like me. But on top of that, you know, keep in mind that many of the cadets are Corps Squad athletes as well. So, you know, it's one thing to be able to tackle the academic challenges of West Point. It's another thing to be able to balance your calendar, your wits, to get proper sleep in and eat when you're also going to practices and you have competition. And I played 150s, now known as the sprint football. And in the fall semester, you know, we were at practice. And I was, from the moment that classes let out in the afternoon, I was at practice, then I was at the meetings and at the team tables, and you're beat up and you're tired, but you still got to pull your weight academically. So it can be a real learning experience in how to manage your time and learn self-discipline and grow up fast, to prepare yourself for life and some of the real challenges you're going to have as an officer in the Army who is tasked with leading the finest young men and women our nation has to offer.
And Sam, I guess the next big milestone is completion of sophomore year summer training and returning to West Point, because the guideline is that once you return for the first day of junior year, you're committed to 5 years of Army service. Here they call it 2 years gets you 7 in the U.S. Army. And that's a big milestone when you say, okay, this is what I'm choosing to do to complete West Point and then serve in the Army for a minimum of 5 years. Could be, as you did, 30-year experience and career of service. What is that like when you have to jump over the boundary and make that commitment as a junior?
From my own experience, I would say it really was a decision you'd already made. So that first day back for cow year, it was like any other day, because mentally you had already made the decision that this was what you were going to do, that you wanted to become a part of the profession of arms, that you came to West Point to become an officer. But there are two times during your cadet experience where you'll lose the most of your classmates, the ones who choose to not continue. One of them happens at about 3 weeks into Beast Barracks. People have their first opportunity to decide if they want to stay in. And we lost a lot of people at that point after the first 3 weeks. The next big milestone was the coming back for cow year. And people knew that the first academic day back was going to be their commitment day. And so we would have those who had gone home for their summer leave and had done soul searching or whatever and decide that they were not going to remain at the academy. And so, but that day, that specific day, when you walk into Washington Hall for lunch, when they do the announcements from the poop deck, one of the official announcements will be for whatever class it is that just had their first academic day of cow year. The sergeant at arms will announce, welcome to the profession of arms for the class of 1987, and we all stand up and cheer, and everybody stands up and cheers and everything else, because at that point forward, guess what, you got to graduate or you're going to go into the Army one way or another, but we got you.
That is something that we see it with athletes. We see it across the academy, a big commitment moment. Now you progress through your junior year. They call it cow year at West Point. What is it like when you become a senior and they call you a firstie?
It adds a little cockiness to your step, I won't deny. Once you have become a firstie, your class has now assumed the mantle of the leadership of the Corps of Cadets, and therefore you're tasked with the running of the day-to-day operations of the Corps of Cadets, the training, and that extends all the way down to your cadet company. And you take great pride in being able to demonstrate the time and effort that you're committing to the Corps is paying off through how well you march, how well you execute, how well you conduct your day-to-day duties within the cadet company area, how clean you keep all the rooms, how well you maintain good order and discipline among the ranks. But there is a special feeling about being a firstie. I mean, you think about it, you have off-post privileges, you got a car, you get the firstie club, you got all these things that you've always seen the classes ahead of you enjoy and flaunt in your face, and now you've got it, and it's a good feeling. Plus, it's interesting, when you're a plebe, you count the number of days you've been at the academy, and then you compare it to how many days you have left, and it's dismaying. But when you're a firstie, you're not thinking about how many days you've been there anymore. You're looking at that calendar, that academic calendar they give you at the beginning of every year, and you're taking your Sharpie and you're lining one more day off each day, and you're counting the days left. And you've already got it marked up with, okay, we're almost there. We can make it now. We know we're going to make it.
Well, two of the big days, there's another big day senior year. We're going to get to it in a minute. That happens in mid-December. But tell us a little bit about the two milestones when you have branch night, when you select the branch of the Army that you would like to serve in, or it's actually assigned for you. You get to put in your preferences. And then in January, you have post night, where based on class rank, you go up and select a duty station in the U.S. Army. How are those milestones for you as you really have your Army career shaped?
They really are those those ceremonies are really where you start to realize how close you are to transitioning from cadet gray to Army green. And when it comes to branch night, you've submitted your top 3 choices. And of course, you're hoping that you're going to get one of your top 3. And one of the aspects of West Point, and I taught Army ROTC, as you are well aware, at Providence College, is that West Point has a larger allocation of combat arms branches. And most of the cadets are wanting to go one of the combat arms branches. And it's normally the top 3 branches are going to be things like infantry, armor, aviation, field artillery, engineers, and things like that. And by and large, about, I don't know what the statistic is now because I haven't really looked. But when the class of '87 was doing their branch selection, I would say probably 80% or more of our class received one of their top 3. And if you were in the top 50% of the class, you probably, unless it was aviation, which was the first branch to go out for us, you probably received your top choice. So it was branch night was a relief once you opened up your envelope and you looked at your branch and you saw that, yes, I got one of the ones I wanted, and I'm happy with that. And then you could start mentally thinking about, where do I want to go serve? So that followed at branch night, and they take, say for instance, if you're armor branch like me, when you commissioned, they took all the armor branch cadets and they lined them up. For us, it was at Thayer Hall in one of the big conference rooms, and they had us lined up by order of merit, first to last ranking cadet in armor branch. And number 1 guy stood up, and they had the big board on the stage. It showed where all the open billets were, and chose an open billet, and they took it off the board, and you just made your way across. And you were hoping, depending on where you were sitting, that something that looked good was still going to be on that board by the time you stood up. So that's probably, there was probably more sweat and bullets for folks who were in the bottom half of each OML, depending on your branch, about where you were going to be able to select from.
Yes, and we had the pleasure of attending the infantry post-selection night this year, watching about over 200 of the seniors select their post locations for infantry units around the world. And then you have a lot of, just leading up to graduation day, you've got milestones, like I always hear about the 100th night dinner and some of the other events that lead up to graduation. What are some of the other key lead up events?
Well, you can't discount spring break. The last spring break that you're there, you really feel like as soon as you come back from spring break, you're on the home stretch. You only have a few weeks left before graduation week. And at the academy, the academics are, and the term ends are all conducted prior to graduation week. So by the time graduation week rolls around, yeah, you still got another week at the academy, and you've got all the parades, the drill steamer parade, the graduation parade, and all the other things. But you're not worrying about academics so much anymore, and that's such a relief once you have all your grades in, and you know that we're just on cruise control to finally have the ceremony. So you have a lot of rehearsals and a lot of walkthroughs of all the ceremonies of the parades, but you're ready, and it doesn't take that much of a walkthrough to be ready for your graduation, because you've already completed all of the major required milestones that you have to complete successfully in order to commission. But 100th night and it becomes a blur, actually, because when I look back on second semester, first year, there was the 100th night and the pomp and ceremony and the 100th night show that my class put on, which I actually still have a program for that I framed is in my patio bar. And then the spring break, which I remember very well, going on spring break with some of my classmates. But after that, it was just a blur. And then suddenly, boom, it was graduation week and your family was there. And we were, being feted through, banquets and having time with family and walking around the academy with loved ones and showing them this and that and telling them stories about the different monuments and the statues and your experiences, and maybe not telling them some stories about some of your experiences as well. And then it's graduation, and it's you got about 24 more hours to clear out your stuff and you're gone. And but it's an exhilaration that once it's through, you have a lot of moment of reflection as you drive off the installation for the last time, and you're no longer a cadet. And you don't realize it at the time, at least I didn't, how much of a bond that you have with the academy. But that bond will call you back to the academy over the years. And it happens through association with your classmates, others that you serve, that you went to the academy with from the different classes, the grad associations, and being able to interact with your classmates both professionally and on a non-formal basis. And what happens is that in the conversations, you realize how much you want to go back to the academy, how much you want to give back to the academy. And it becomes, one of your favorite places in life to be. And so you don't think about those things when you drive off the academy after you graduate. That day you drive off and you think, well, I'm done. I'm not going to come back. I don't have to come back in a few days. I won't have to come back in a year. But I'm telling you, within about 10 years, you're going to say, I would love to go back to West Point. I would love to go back and visit the place. I would love to go back and feel the connection again. And trust me, you will transition into an old grad.
Hey, now, I know you come back very often for football and for your sprint football reunions. You actually play in the reunion game, which is remarkable. It's not touch football. We'll say that one for another day, but anyway, there's so many traditions involved with West Point graduation. The cadets wear their gray uniforms, usually their white slacks or skirts, and the white hats. And tell us about some of the traditions that stand out for you.
Well, probably some of the goofier traditions that stick out with me are things like the Sedgwick Monument, for example, where if you were academically struggling in a class and you had an important test, a work progress review or a final exam coming up, and you felt like you needed a little help from higher, you would get in full dress underarms and you would report to the Sedgwick Monument at midnight and salute him and then go around and spin the spurs. And the tradition is that the spinning of the spurs, properly reporting to General Sedgwick, meant that you would be granted success on your tests the next day. And what's really funny is that a lot of cadets have actually followed through with reporting to General Sedgwick. Sometimes if it's during term end time of the year and you happen to be sneaking out of your room and cruising over to the plane around midnight, you'd be surprised to see how many people are over there paying good old General Sedgwick a visit. But there are, other traditions such as the class ring itself, how you wear it when you're a cadet. When you get your ring, you put it on, you wear it with your class crest closest to your heart, and it remains with the class crest closest to your heart until you graduate. And when you graduate, there's a ceremony by which the graduated firsties will all remove their rings, flip them around, and turn the academy crest closest to your heart. And the reason is because while you were at the academy, your loyalty was to your class, to see your class through. Once you had graduated, your loyalty was to the long gray line. And the rotation of your class ring reflected the fact that you were now members of the long gray line, and your loyalty was to a higher order of the bond of the graduates who had gone before you and those with which you were about to serve. And so I always think about that when I put my ring on. And I would imagine that just about every academy grad, when they pick their ring up, they make sure that they put it on with the class crest facing outward and the academy crest closest to their heart. And by the way, if you're ever on an airplane or you're traveling or something and you see what you think is a West Point ring and you look at it and you do see the academy crest on it, if the academy crest is facing outward, that way you know that you're sitting next to a firstie. So I've actually had conversations strike up with people when I'm traveling, and I realize that the person sitting next to me is a cadet still because I see their ring and I see how they wear it.
Okay, now I got to ask you about a couple of graduation day traditions. One is that $1 is collected by each member of the class, I understand, and presented to one of the cadets, who gets a big special recognition when he or she goes up to get their diploma. Tell us about that tradition.
Absolutely. That's called the class goat. It's very financially rewarding to be the class goat. Starts you off right on graduation day with about $1,000 in $1 bills. The way it works is once the final academic standings are set, we now know who the bottom academically ranked cadet is in the class. That person is designated as the GOAT. They announce who the GOAT is, and it is followed by many cheers from the class for their success in achieving that distinguished honor. And then we pass a paper bag through each cadet company, and every member of the class will put $1 into that class or into the bag. And at the graduation ceremony, the GOAT is presented with the brown paper bag stuffed with the money that he or she has dutifully earned as being the GOAT of our class, and walks away with an extra $1,000. So it's a great ceremony. It's lots of laughs, and it also is recognizing that, hey, your academic ranking once you graduate doesn't make a hill of beans of difference, because you are all second lieutenants in the Army once you've graduated. And no one's going to ask you at your first duty station if you were the GOAT or you were the first captain. They just want you to be ready to lead the finest young men and women in our U.S. Army around the world, and provide the officer leadership at the platoon level that they need. So we recognize that as each class, that we love our GOAT, and we reward our GOAT with a nice financial reward for towing the line for us.
Well, that's a neat story, and you tell it well. One of the traditions is involved that I've watched, and is what the first captain does at the moment he or she is asked to dismiss the class. And I notice, and it's something I follow because we get the privilege of standing up front to videotape the closing minutes, which starts with the cadets raising their right hand and being sworn in by the commandant. And then there's a prayer, and they sing the Army song. And then there's a very interesting series of orders that goes from the superintendent to the commandant to the first captain to dismiss the class. And what I've noticed is there is how the first captain accepts the order from the commandant to dismiss the class, sometimes they'll say beat Navy. Sometimes they'll use their, they'll say, yes, sir, and their class motto. And not everyone can hear that. I get the privilege of standing up front and hearing that. And then the first captain turns around and gives the order to dismiss, and the famous hat toss is seen, and the band strikes up. It's an exhilarating moment. Tell us a little bit about your experience, and where did what is the tradition of? Is there a firm tradition about how the first captain of the class accepts the order to dismiss?
I don't necessarily recall if there was a discussion among our class about what response would be given by the first captain when receiving the order to dismiss the class. And as I recall, and I'll probably have a classmate jump on me for being incorrect on this, so I'm ready and willing to take the flogging if that happens. But as I recall, our class motto was part of the response for the first captain. Class of '87, we did a lot of beating Navy that year. And while we were at the academy, you know, and that's something I'm going to say about the class of 2020, is that they actually are graduating with 3 wins over Navy, 2 wins over Air Force, 2 Commander-in-Chief trophy. So, you know, my hat's off to the class of 2020. And I don't want any of the other Corps Squad athletes to take offense by what I'm saying. Honestly, I know there was a lot of beating Navy going on among all the Corps Squad teams for the class of 2020. Phenomenal record of accomplishment on the field of friendly strife. It doesn't matter what sport you played. There was really a significant rise in the level of competition providing on all of the athletic fields provided by the Corps cadets. And I can't say how much gratitude and pride all of the Long Gray Line feel for what the class of 2020 has accomplished upon the fields of friendly strife. But back to that, you know, when we say you beat Navy 3 times, you know, we're talking about football. So class of '87 also walked away with 2 Commander-in-Chief trophy, including our first year. And but class of 2020, upon the field of friendly strife, actually won up 87 on wins over Navy with 3 as opposed to 2. But during the graduation ceremony for our class, though, as I recall, again, I believe that our class motto was the response, and then we did the class dismiss, and the covers flew in the air, and everyone was hugging, and again, it was such a blur, though. But once that sequence of events started, it was like you were watching a slow-burning fuse that suddenly sped up, and then it just exploded in quite amount of emotion and happiness. And lost among it were some of the intricacies of the actual ceremony itself.
It must be a blur and exhilarating, and to look around Mikey Stadium and see the stands full. I know your parents and family are there watching. Sam, we're about 10 minutes before the ceremony is going to start. On the plane at West Point, we'll let our audience shift over to watching the live stream from West Point. And we'll come back on later. I'll give a little summary of what we saw. Do you have a final thought for us on Graduation Day 2020 for the United States Military Academy?
Again, as we talked about when we first started, just so happy to know that these young men and women are having a graduation ceremony. I've got it on the TV here, so as soon as we finish up, we'll be watching it. I can't even express the gratitude that the entire Long Gray Line has for their fortitude to make it through 4 years, to be in the position to be graduating today. Congratulations to every one of the new second lieutenants. I understand they've already commissioned.
Yeah.
They commissioned 2 or 3 weeks ago when they traditionally would have actually graduated, but they still have their ceremony. The entire country is going to be watching you, and by the time the ceremony is over, I know that the entire country is going to know that another generation of the finest leaders for our Army today have passed through the halls of the United States Military Academy and are prepared to go lead the soldiers of our Army for the next 30 years, bringing continued success and security to the United States. So congratulations to every member of the class of 2020. My only regret is that, given that my time is over with the Green Machine, that I'll never have the opportunity to actually serve with you. But I certainly do take comfort in knowing that you all will be holding down the ramparts of freedom, and I will sleep soundly at night knowing that you are. So looking forward to a great ceremony here, and so glad that the President has been able to be there, to be the guest speaker. It's really such an honor. Not every class has the opportunity to have the President of the United States as their speaker. Traditionally, it's about once every 3 years, the President will be at your academy to be the speaker at the commencement. 2020, you've earned it. Today is your day. Enjoy it. And from 87, our country we strengthen.
Well, I just want to thank you, Colonel Sam Houston, class of 1987, good friend. How many years service in the U.S. Army is it, Sam?
Well, I had to back out at MRD at 30 years, so
30 years service, that's tremendous service to our country, and such a good description of the West Point experience and graduation day. We went a little longer than I expected, but this is terrific. You described it so well. I just want to thank you. And now we'll let everybody shift over to watch the live stream from West Point of today's graduation for the class of 2020. And so, Sam, thank you again. We'll talk again very soon. And on behalf of Sons.
Yeah, Ken, one thing, you didn't ask me this, but I'm going to just go ahead and throw the question out. If the question was asked, would you go through your 4 years at West Point again? Absolutely, in a heartbeat. So there you go.
Okay. And Sam Houston, we really appreciate your insight and describing your experience at West Point and what it's like for the seniors graduating today. The ceremony will start in just a few minutes from the plane at West Point, and it's available on the stream. It'll be available here on our page, West Point Football Report. I'd just like to thank everybody at Sons of the American Legion Radio, representing the 350,000 members of the Sons of the American Legion, serving America's veterans, all part of the American Legion, the 2 million veterans who are part of the world's largest veterans organization, the Women's Auxiliary, great service organization. It's a family of almost 3 million supporters, veterans and supporters of veterans and the U.S. military. So, and we represent Squadron 135, based at Post 135 in White Plains, New York. So thank you again to Sam Houston. This is Ken Kraetzer for Sons of the American Legion. Let's enjoy watching the pageantry and the history that's being made today at West Point with the graduation of class of 2020. Have a great day, everybody, and thank you for watching.